We have no doubt that the district attorney will make the very best effort to proceed with the criminal case, to seek justice in this case. And we have no doubt that we are going to always seek justice for Eddie, also known as Gwen, and for all children who are transgendered, and all adults who are transgendered, because we love them all.
Well, Eddie Gwen was my baby. And I loved him from the moment he was born, and I love him now. And it's so painful to think of how he died, how long it took, and how much he suffered. Because his whole life, he suffered with people who didn't understand him. Couldn't even look him in the face, some people, or would call him names, even in front of me. He had a lot of pain as he was growing up, and in his death, he had a lot of pain. I always try to protect them, as any good mom, I think, would do. We always want to protect our children from harm. I only wish I could have been there that night so that I could have protected him. Because I loved him with all of my heart. And no matter how much I talk about it, and how many cards I get, and beautiful letters, it's not going to bring him back. But I want people to learn from this, from his death. And I already know from the amazing letters that I've gotten that he didn't die in vain. There has been changes. And if you don't understand someone like Eddie Gwen, take the time to get to know him, her, him, and give them a chance. Because their lives are a lot harder than our lives. A lot harder. Trust me, I know. I saw it in his eyes. No matter how many hugs and how many kisses and how many outfits and makeup I bought him, you know, I couldn't cover that pain.
Michael Magidson and his friend Jason Casares met a person they believed introduced herself as Lita, and a 19-year-old woman whom they believed to be a woman. And Michael and Jason brought Lita over to the Merrill house, where he and his friends would frequently party, drink, play dominoes, smoke marijuana, just hang out, have fun. And Lita joined into this mix on a regular basis and began having sexual relations with various of the men, including Michael, until one evening it was discovered that Lita was a biological male, not a female, and everyone went crazy, if you will. And Lita was beaten up and killed.
When I was pregnant with Gwen, I had dreamed of a little girl, and I'd chosen the name Amber Rose. When she was born, she obviously was an Amber Rose and was born with a penis and was Eddie. So as she grew older, I noticed a lot of feminine tendencies, even from a young age, that she, for example, would like to play with Pearl's Barbie dolls, and Pearl would like to play with Gwen's Tonka trucks, and, you know, she liked all the girly things, being in the kitchen with mommy and cooking. And I crocheted at that time, and, you know, wanting to crochet and wanting to do the things that mommy did. And to me were girly things that you wouldn't think a normal boy would want to be interested in, you know. As she grew older, though, the sensitivity, the finickiness, the feminine gestures, even her voice was more feminine than even mine and Pearl's. I noticed you know, it was more pronounced. It was more there, more noticeable for a lot of people, even to the point where my friends were noticing that, you know, and would make the comments, you know, oh, you know, Eddie's gay, or Eddie's going to be a fag, or whatever. Even though they were derogatory and they hurt me as a mom, you know, you don't, because of the way the world is, you don't want to subject any child to, you know, the cruelty that's out there. And just with those comments and in the negative words, you know, I didn't want to believe that. But nevertheless, like I said, she was so different that I did take her to a therapist. And, you know, maybe I wanted to make sure that if she was, then, you know, I would do everything in my power as a mom to help her get through it. And so I took her to a therapist. The therapist said that she was surrounded by women, not to worry about it, that a lot of little boys act out, that this is very normal and natural for them to act out, and nothing becomes of it. So don't worry about it. So I didn't. But nevertheless, as she got older, you know, it became more obvious that she wasn't Eddie. And very much so was Gwen.
Kids are teased across lines of difference. For children of different ability levels, different skin colors, from different class backgrounds, they often experience harassment and teasing or bullying at the hands of their peers. And many kids can go to school administrators or teachers or even to their families, and they'll receive support, you know, saying, you're okay, you're fine, these other kids are bullies, you're a good person. But many times for queer teens or transgender teens, they've been rejected at home as well. So it's not like they can run home to their parents and ask for that sort of support, much less to their school administrators or their teachers, so that they suffer to a greater extent from this sort of teasing and harassment.
The events really got started with when a group, including the Jaren neighbors, Michael Magidson, Jason Cazares, and Jose Merrill, were sitting around the table playing dominoes, and Lita was also there. And for reasons I can only speculate about, I think it had something to do with perhaps Jose Merrill, this being more of an issue in his mind, and also they're being very drunk, suddenly starts asking Lita if she's a man or a woman. And as the issue keeps being pushed, I guess everybody gets interested in it. Ultimately, Michael takes Lita to the bathroom, feeling that maybe she just doesn't want to reveal herself because it's getting beyond just having her ask a question. They want her to prove it, that she'll feel more comfortable just disclosing to him, and he can't find out. And ultimately, Nicole Brown, who was Paul Merrill's girlfriend, who also gets involved in this inquiry, goes into the bathroom, forces her hand up Lita's skirt and feels male genitalia. I think she at that point starts the chaos because she comes out screaming that it's a man.
So I think from the go she resented, from my perspective, a younger and a more beautiful woman coming into her domain and teasing the men, and they responded, and, you know, she was jealous.
We don't tell our teenagers how to talk about sex. We don't give them the tools to have open, frank discussions with one another about sexuality, especially between boys and girls. We don't tell them how to do that. So I think this puts a transgender teen at even higher risk, because we don't even have a discourse for transgendered adults with which to engage in to explain to a non-transgendered adult who they might be in an intimate relationship with that they are transgendered, right? So to expect a teenager to understand how to explain to a biologically and socially male boy that she was a biological male and identifies as a social female at this point is ridiculous, because we don't even know how to tell adults to do that. So that puts a transgender teen at a much higher risk, because we've given her no tools with which to explain her own unique sexual and gender identification to others.
Michael, from his point of view, and as he testified, still didn't believe it. He thinks that Nicole is kind of a twit, and that And even the way that she described it, she wasn't sure she had felt what she had felt. But Jose is having a very strong reaction to this apparent discovery, and Michael decides at that point that he's got to know for sure. And he tackles Lita to the ground, lifts up her legs and pulls aside her underwear, revealing the male genitalia, and then he goes berserk, and he starts beating Lita. It's unclear to me still from the evidence the extent to which he was pulled off or other people joined in, but ultimately it became something that at least Jaron, Michael, and Jose were involved in, and depending upon who you believe, Nicole may have been involved in it, Jason may have been involved in it. But after Lita has been severely beaten up and rendered perhaps unconscious, if she's conscious, it's pretty at a low level. She's tied up, taken into the garage, and somebody, many people alleged it was Michael, we said it was Jaron Neighbors, put a rope around Lita's neck and then strangled her to death. The autopsy, the coroner, the forensic pathologist concluded that the cause of death was strangulation, but associated with blunt trauma to the head, because there were several serious blows inflicted by Jaron Neighbors and or Jose Merrill with various blunt objects that also may have caused death even without the strangulation.
Some or all of the defendants began to beat her, to slap her, and to punch her. Jose ran into the kitchen, grabbed a can of food of some kind, a large can, came back into the living room and approached Gwen and struck her on the top of the head with it as she was kneeling down. Tossed the can aside, went back into the kitchen, picked up a frying pan, came back into the living room, swung the frying pan and struck Gwen in the forehead.
I think that everyone in the courtroom understood that my client was drunk out of his mind. He was, not grasping anything. And so his testimony was, he was there, he heard a little bit, but he thought it was a joke. He kept, like, what do you mean a joke? Well, here I see a beautiful woman in front of me. He never realized. He wasn't part of the other conversations. And they're saying, maybe she's a man. He never understood it. He, from his perspective, thought what they were doing to her, insulting her, and then later being physically assaultive toward her, was a bad thing. Why are they beating up a woman? What are you doing? And he tried to intercede. He pulled, Michael off. He separated them. He did what he could. And then, toward the end, he learned when Michael looked at him and said, but Jason, she's a man, or words to that effect. He was dumbfounded. And he understood, they're not beating up in his mind. They're not beating up a woman, they're beating up a man.
She came out and we had our talk that I knew would come, and where she confessed what she felt, and that she never identified with her penis, that she in fact felt abnormal and felt like a freak because she never identified with it. And being a boy, that she just didn't click with any of the things that boys were, and there were so many different emotions going on within her. We were on my bed, I distinctly remember that night, and we were in pajamas, and I think I was painting my toenails or something, it was because we used to do things like that. It was not abnormal for us to do that. And my daughter and I later discussed that night, Gwen and I's conversation when Gwen came out, and we talked about losing Eddie, because we did. We lost Eddie and we gained Gwen, but it was almost a closure. It didn't happen overnight. And there was a lot of changes that went in within the household, and attire and makeup, and there was a lot of shopping to do, that's for sure. But it was more fun, not just because it was shopping, it was because Gwen was finally becoming who she truly was. And seeing her smile and pretty and happy and content finally in life, and not like holding a deep secret, to me as a mom was very rewarding.
I would always walk them to school. I would, I was always the older one. And I remember like kids telling her, your brother's a fag and this and that. And I would try and fight with little kids, and I'd say, you better not call him that or I'm going to beat you up. And I would always threaten a lot of kids at school because I didn't like people messing with my brother at the time, He was my little brother to me, and I was like, people are messing with him, I'm going to protect him. And so I remember that happening. I remember a lot of times, kids in class were saying, just mean stuff like that to him. It was always like, you're a fag, or you're this, you're that. And I remember my mom telling me that kids, were throwing rocks and doing other stuff like that.
Many high schools are places of rampant homophobia. In fact, most states don't have laws protecting gay students. California, luckily, is one of the few states that has a law protecting gay students. California's AB 537. However, this law is not implemented consistently or equally across schools or within schools. In my research on high schools, for instance, so after spending 1.5 years in a high school, I heard one teacher once address homophobic comments, even though I heard these comments multiple times per day, multiple times per hour.
So I demand that the legislators go back to the table and start working on a budget and pass my budget. And I hope that those that want to sell out to the special interests, those girly men up there in Sacramento.
So that the message students receive at school is that gay people are not people. It's okay to make fun of them. And in fact, this sort of behavior is embedded in the rituals of the schools, right? At school assemblies, at dances, children make fun of fags, right? And not as much lesbians, but they make fun of gay men in these rituals, and no teacher steps in on a regular basis to say that this is wrong, that this is not an okay thing to joke about, so that students receive a message from the school as an institution that it's okay to make fun of gay people. And as far as transgender teens, they're not even on the map at most schools, right? That if schools do talk about equality, they're talking about homophobia, but they're not talking about transphobia. They're not talking about teens who identify as non-gender normative, boys who identify as girls, or girls who end up identifying as boys, right? As far as schools tend to go is talking about homophobia, but they don't talk about transphobia.
It's got to be a horrible feeling to feel that you go through this alone and it's your secret, and that you can't tell your parent because you're born this way, and I know this now. I mean, I didn't know so much as I know now about transgender, and I understand. And I feel horrible for Gwen to have had to endure so much ignorance and so much, she was alone so much of this during her transition, and the non-acceptance, which was the greatest burden, I believe. October 16, 2002, I had an officer at the door with the chaplain for Newark PD, which ironically happened to be our old pastor from the church, Ed Moore. I already knew when I saw both of them coming to the door that they were coming to give me some bad news. It's almost like you go into a whole different world. I can't even explain to you how I felt. My nice, happy world all of a sudden turned dark and cold and scary. And I went into shock. I remember not wanting to wake up and wanting to die because the pain was so immense. It's still immense. It's still hard. And it's hard because of how they murdered her. She didn't die naturally in her sleep or in a car accident where it happened quickly. It happened over a course of hours, and it was brutal. And that's hard. Oh my goodness. That's the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. I pulled them in the room and I said, I gotta tell you guys something. And what's wrong, Mom? I said, at that point I would say Eddie, I didn't say Gwen. So I said, they killed Eddie. He's dead. And they started crying hysterically. Brandon ran out of the room. And Michael just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. I've never seen my children cry so much.
All rise. Department 510 of the Superior Court of the State of California in and for the County of Alameda is now in session. Your Honorable Harry Shepard presiding. Please be seated.
Because these three men took upon themselves the power of life or death. We're here because there is someone who isn't and who cannot be. We're here because these men decided that they had the right to extinguish a human life.
Jason Caceres, through myself and through the evidence, says heartfeltly and sincerely, he's sorry. This was a great tragedy. This was an explosion of emotion that still resonates now in this court. It is a tragedy from every perspective. And we heartfeltly say we feel contrition.
Jason Cazares told Jaron neighbors, they're going to kill that bitch. Jaron knew exactly what that meant. A short time before in the house, he'd witnessed an extreme escalation in the level of violence used against Lita when she was struck by Jose Merrill with a can of food.
In this case, more so than almost any other case I can think of, involves so many preconceptions and feelings and emotions on the part of the jury that it's really, really hard to know how they're going to respond to it.
Eddie was tried and convicted and executed.
Both Mr. Lamero and I jokingly said, and only maybe half jokingly before the case began, that this case was won and lost in jury selection.
We want you to make this case an example. This is something that should not have happened. This is something that should never happen again. You can send a signal. You can be the conscience of this community.
Dr. Poyman described reaction at three different levels. The first is a personal level of a emotionally immature heterosexual male discovering that the sex that he thought he had was a woman was actually with a man, in the sense of shame and embarrassment that would cause. And frankly, from shame and embarrassment can come anger. The second was not only the revelation personally, but the revelation to other people. Not only his friends, this is another double whammy, if you will, not only friends in the group, but also people outside the group. And so shame and humiliation is something that is really experienced socially. It involves other people. And then the third level was the fact that it was a threat to the group itself, the disclosure, and there's a group reaction that's separate from the two different reasons for the individual reaction.
So after having sex with Gwen and finding out that Gwen was biologically male, Jose Muro thought that that meant he was gay. And he was profoundly disturbed by this. And the reason he was profoundly disturbed by this was that in his world, to be gay was to be the opposite of everything that was masculine. And that even though he had obviously desired Gwen and found her beautiful as a woman and engaged in sexual activity with her, and using sex acts that might be the same sex acts he'd use with a girl, because Gwen was biologically male, that meant he was gay. And being gay for him meant that he wasn't a man and he wasn't masculine. And that's profoundly disturbing, and in fact threatens psychic chaos, which is why he would be banging his head against a wall and crying upon that discovery.
Murder here was ever perpetrated. I don't care about whom. out of his mind. I don't mean it in a legal insanity. He was mindless. His eyes were like a zombie.
I think that many women, if not most women, have experienced unwanted sex. And I don't mean rape, but I mean when their male partner is insistent and maybe they don't really want to, but they submit anyway. And so I think that they're a little less receptive to the idea of, oh my God, I had sex with, if I had only known. And I also think that of homosexual relations, just sort of the concept of it, there's much more of a stigma, and probably more with men than women, on male-to-male homosexual relations than female-to-female homosexual relations.
What do I hear from the prosecutor? He wants first degree. First degree because they're friends, they're close enough to be brothers, they go out together, they play soccer together, they have intimate conversations. That's why he wants first degree, and then he makes up things. My client hit him with the shovel, hit Lena, hit her with the shovel. There's no evidence, no one testified. You want to stick something on the wall? You want to see something, in bright lights? You want to be reminded throughout the trial? And pretend, that there's neon lights. And there's no credible evidence that my client ever did any act of violence.
Now, a manslaughter in the heat of passion can look exactly like a murder with malice, either express or implied, but the act is a result of a provocation that is a reasonable provocation, one that a reasonable person would say, I can understand why somebody would get very upset about this. And then the killing itself has to then be a result of this rash and impulsive act as opposed to reason or judgment. The reasonableness needs to be in terms of the raising of the emotion. The reasonableness does not relate to the actual reaction because it's never reasonable to go kill somebody. But there can be as much as a direct and explicit intent to kill, and if that arises a heat of passion upon sufficient provocation, the malice is negated and it's a manslaughter. We have from the beginning not denied that Mike had our responsibility for the behavior that led to Eddie Araujo's death. But the law has to fix the level of responsibility, and the correct level of responsibility in this case is manslaughter.
You said you would plead to manslaughter before the case?
Yes.
Okay.
Whether or not the decedent intentionally deceived or just presented herself as she is in the eyes of these two, we'll call them young, masculine men, it put them into a panic of agony.
I don't believe that that's a defense appropriate. I feel that they were making excuses, and they're outdated excuses. And hopefully after this trial is over with and the verdict is read, we will be, hopefully they'll be thrown out and not be allowed to use anymore in these hateful, brutal murders of transgendered people. So I'm not in agreement with, I don't agree that this was a deception, because Gwen was being true to herself. Gwen was Gwen.
But they've got a classic heat of passion. I see one guy who the last time he cried was when his child was born blind and deaf. He's a strong male, an athlete, a football player, hero in high school, and he's there sobbing for the most of the time. And sobbing, like, I'm not gay, I'm not gay. Well, from my perspective, any fool could see you're not gay, my friend. What the hell is the big deal?
October 4th, 2002, all three of these defendants made a conscious decision. And they sit here today, and you can look at them. You've been asked to do so by their counsel, their evidence. These men seated at these tables made a conscious decision, and what that decision was that Eddie Araujo, the victim in this case, needed to die for what they considered to be his transgressions. And that decision was predicated on their collective belief that Eddie was a vile, worthless, subhuman, whose life lacked any redeeming value in their world.
Is he so fragile in his own self-awareness, his own masculine self-image that should do that? How absurd, but it did it.
Eddie had an alter ego. They valued that alter ego. That alter ego was Lita, whom they believed to be a woman. And Lita was someone with whom they could get drunk, get high, enjoy, at least some of them, random sexual encounters.
And then the other guy was zoned out. He was like a zombie, insane eyes, hardly could talk, like just an automaton. And once again, he's like, a self-announced, very masculine male, and obviously had something to do with his own self-image, his own idea of his own masculinity. And it shouldn't be. It's absurd. It's ignorant. But I think it was real.
There's one word that sums it up. The most beautiful word in the criminal justice system is justice. So that's my request. My request is that you return to this courtroom the justice that these guys denied Gwen Araujo. Sorry, Gwen, no trial, no right to counsel, no appeals, no right to remain silent, no rights at all. Die. That was a decision that they made, and it's as real as that.
I think it went well, and I'm very confident that the verdict will be acceptable by me. I'm hopeful that it will. Of course, there's no guarantee. The jury is going to have to deliberate and make that decision and give us the verdict that they feel is appropriate for the murder of Gwen.
Under those circumstances and the fact that the jury has been deliberating for, I think this is the 10th day, I will now declare a mistrial and discharge the jury for further service in this case.
Yes, I'm Tony Serra, represent Jason Caceres, and at one point it was 11-1 not guilty. The final tally was 10-2 not guilty.
As I understand it, it was 7 for first-degree murder.
I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. I felt this whole weight just come down on me. If you really look at it, I wasn't there. My body was physically there, but I just wanted to leave so badly because I felt like I was just going to faint right there in front of all of the reporters and the cameras. It was too much. It was too much, and at that point, it's like I'm human, and sometimes it's not appropriate, to tape or to get a statement. People think that I'm always so strong and I can do it all. I'm not always so strong, and I am human, and that was a real big human part of me right there where I just couldn't do it. It was too much. It took a toll on my body, physically and emotionally.
Though it will be very difficult for this family, they are very happy that the DA will retry this case so that whomever is responsible for this tragic and criminal killing of Gwen will be held accountable.
I was in shock with Madison. I thought they were torn between Caceres, but when they read the one on Madison, I was just in shock. I was in total, utter shock. I can't believe. I thought the evidence showed clearly what he did, testimony, everything.
As the reality of a mistrial sunk in, I felt frustrated. But I knew that I'd try the case again.
I accidentally walked in front of the TV when the news was on, and I saw Gwen's picture, and I broke down. I started crying really, really hard because here I was standing in front of the television and saw a really beautiful girl whose life's being taken away. That was the first moment when I realized that I couldn't just live my life without being more visible and without really do something about it. With trying to think of what we could do during the Pride weekend to create a more visibility for the community for being transgender. And initially the idea was to just build an altar on Pride weekend for people to come and see. And then as the discussion developed, we've decided that it's time. It's time to really have a rally. It's time to really show more visibility as a community. And we start planning the march.
I'm sure I had close friends in the march. I think it's all a good thing. You know, like, law evolves, and usually law evolves way slower, almost retarded, because we got to rely on precedent, much slower than sociological factors or psychological factors or evolutionary factors. So we're always in the dark ages compared to the cutting edge of evolution. So it's very important to bring law into, I don't know what you want to call it, the contemporary motifs. So when you have a case that's symbolic, when the media, pays attention to it, when there's parades and outcry and outbursts, I mean, something's wrong. That's the way things are reformed. That's a good thing. First Amendment is a good thing. So I'm completely for, Gwen's mother parading and all of the politicizing and all of the media attention, because the basic heart of this case, for the other two defendants, not my case, is untenable in any kind of evolved, sophisticated, compassionate, understanding culture.
The Gwen Araujo Memorial website was an idea that came to me on the way home from Newark on the day that I attended the memorial. It was just an emotional experience. I really didn't know how to respond other than to be there. Then on the way home in my car, I was driving along the freeway, and I thought, what if I was to create a web page that memorialized Gwen's life and her death? And the idea grew from there. The website started out fairly slow. I think we might have had a few thousand hits over the first few months that I had it. And then the excitement or the response to the website grew around certain activities in the community where Gwen was memorialized or maybe featured in the media somehow. And right now we have 210,000 hits on the website. So I'm really glad it's been an instrument through which the family's been able to reach out and communicate with the community. It's also been a place where people can come and have a little bit of an experience of Gwen and hopefully get to know more about who she was, what she was like.
Her heart to mine, Because when a baby's in your womb, their heart beats through hours.
But we were also reminded at the worst time how cruel this world can be.
We look up to the sky and we see the star, and we think of Gwen, and how she'll be waiting for us when we come join her.
Block traffic here. Stay together. Go ahead.
Amended is before us. Kindly present on your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill addresses the use of the so-called panic strategy by criminal defendants in murder cases and ensures that this strategy is not effective in justifying brutal crimes based on a victim's sexual orientation, gender, or other protected status.
Meeting of the New York City Council will come to order.
Action to feel, oh my God, you know, what the hell am I going to do? I got to, you know, your job is to always protect your kids. So in a way, I know you're being a protective and loving dad.
When it comes to the trials.
This time was different. And she always checked in. Always.
I would be remiss if I did not mention the way that our police services responded to this tragedy and brought Eddie back home. Work remains to be done in this.
And being truthful with all of this, she was Gwen from birth. But I didn't know that. And I only wish that I would have called her Gwen more often in her lifetime. But I'm not perfect, and I'm human, and I made a mistake. She deserved to have been Gwen from the moment she started her transition. But I didn't do that, and I've learned something. And I hope that other parents of transgender children will also be more understanding, more accepting, get more educated about their children, because there's many, many transgendered people out there. I look at it now as, I used to look at her, out of my 4 children, as she was different. She was special. She had more struggles. And now I look at it as she was my gift from God. Well, this is a very joyous day for Gwen, for myself, and for my family. As you can see, her name is no longer Edward Araujo Jr., but Gwen Amber Rose Araujo. And I hope that everyone from this day forth will recognize her as Gwen and no longer Eddie or Edward. And will also refer to my daughter as Gwen and her and she, and no longer he and him and Eddie. It's issued by the court, and I truly hope in my heart that the world will recognize her as who she is and who she was. And that is, Gwen was transgender and identified as Gwen and as she. And so I hope that with this now,
that you too will recognize her as her mother does, and as a lot of the world does too.
Hello, everyone. Well, I'm 22 years old, and I was born in Dominican Republic. Through society, I'm labeled as a young, female, Latina, transsexual. And, you know, when I was looking at this, it really touched my heart, because I could relate when I was 19 years old, and I was going by another name, the name that was legally given to me when I was younger, and by my mother. And I just never felt like it fitted me, you know, it never fitted who I was. And I recall the pain, the anxiety, the hurt. I didn't feel free. I felt like I was stuck somewhere, but I didn't know where. And it's really hurtful, you know, and now that I could be who I am, accepting myself for who I am and what I'm about, I feel more liberated, I feel more free. Sylvia, can you come? I'm getting emotional.
In Spanish?
No, I just need you support.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Today, finally, I get to talk to Sylvia, I mean, personally, face to face, and I just really found out what an incredible woman she is.
Thank you. Don't cry, Mama. It's okay.
And it means so much to me because she's, you know, a mother, and then I think about my mother and everything that I felt like I put her through. And just to have that support, to have someone there by your side.
It's okay, Mama, you can do it.
It's so different. It feels so good. You feel connected, you feel accepted.
And loved.
And loved. You know, I had my citizenship. And now my name is legally changed to Christina Halexi Sanz Rodriguez. And again, the feeling that I felt, it was amazing. It's like, yes, thank you, Lord. Finally, I can be who I am. I accept myself for all I'm about and all I'm worth, you know, and I have accomplished so much. I've done so much that I'm just really proud of myself for that.
Yes. That's great.
Michael Magidson, I don't believe, really had any sense of there were people out there, for instance, of, in this case, biologically male who associated themselves with being female, wanted to become female. I think that his perception was that this, and I'm projecting here, I don't know for sure, but this was some gay guy who was pretending to be a woman so he can have sex with men who would not choose to have sex with men. And that was the deception. And it wasn't simply the deception, as because it was also the shock and surprise of the sudden discovery. But another factor in this is that the fact that there was a group of people, a group of men, a group of his friends all together. I've always wondered whether the same thing would have happened or anything close to this would have happened if he had been alone when the discovery had been made. Because I think that part of the reaction was the group. And there was a group dynamic that fed on each other. Certainly Michael's reaction in part was based on how Jose was reacting. And he had that may have influenced him more than the discovery itself of Lita's being a biological male.
What happened was a chance encounter. The decedent led, shall we say, a double life.
Defense attorneys seized on the fact that Joel Robles was dressed as a woman when Estanislao Martinez stabbed him to death. Martinez was arrested after jumping through a window at Robles' apartment, wandering naked down Freeway 41. His attorney calls his attack a crime of passion with a twist.
The decedent was dressed up as a woman, represented himself to be a woman. Mr. Martinez thought he was a woman and acted accordingly.
This is known as the gay panic defense. And it's also being used right now in a San Francisco murder trial where 3 men are accused of killing a transgender teenager. Legal experts say it rarely works in getting the defendant found innocent, but it is very successful in getting reduced punishments.
Mr. Martinez was in a bar and hooked up with Joel Robles, and they wound up in Joel Robles' residence. It's pretty clear that up until that point, everything happening was consistent with a pickup, a one-night stand, if you would. At that point in time, when they were at the bar, Joel Robles represented himself to be a woman, and at some point in time, Mr. Martinez discovered that, in fact, Mr. Robles was male.
In the type of manslaughter that the co-defendants were arguing for, it's called a heat of passion manslaughter. There are other kinds of manslaughter, but let's just talk about a heat of passion. So what it takes is an act of provocation that a reasonable person in the same situation as the defendant would be provoked to a state that it would be, in essence, an emotional response and not a premeditation or deliberation response, and therefore it's reduced to manslaughter. And the key word in all of it is reasonable. So it's reasonable. You can't set up your own standards. I think that the two co-defendants, Jose and Michael, they were in a heat of passion. It just wasn't reasonable. From a societal point of view, that is unreasonable. That is unacceptable.
He was killed because Mr. Martinez acted in a panic. Gay rage, if you would.
I think that they were emotional. I think they were traumatized. I think they were hysterically, crazy at the time. But can society endorse that? So you can't set up your own standard. No, society can't endorse it, because it's not reasonable. We use the reasonable man or woman, reasonable person standard. You put him in the position of the defendant, and the reaction was inordinate. Although you were in a heat of passion, my friend, it wasn't a reasonable heat of passion. You're a little off, and we won't endorse it.
And it's not contrived. It's not made up. It is there. It's understandable. Mr. Martinez felt it. And a panel from my county will understand it. I have no doubt about it that they will understand what he was feeling. Is that bias? I don't think so.
Well, sure. I think that there is more of a chance outside of the Bay Area for the sense of outrage and I think that was part of my client's reaction. I think there were other things going on, but for that to be understood. But again, it's not as much of a bias. It's not a bias issue. It's an understanding of how somebody would feel about having been deceived and having sex with somebody that he wouldn't have had sex with had he known. And maybe that's more felt in some communities than others.
We don't, in the case of lynching, we now don't see any kind of defense around that, but that used to be seen as an acceptable crime. Yes, you killed, but the black men, in some cases, they had done nothing. In a large majority of cases, the African-American men who were lynched, there was no record of any kind of complaint of a sexual pass or whatever, much less a rape. It was really often just looking at a woman or just a manufactured claim. But in the heat of the moment, that kind of passion was seen as an excusable crime.
I think the panic defenses, whether they're trans panic, gay panic, race panic, religion panic, are all sort of the same. Because what they are is an excuse, and we wouldn't call it a defense, we'd actually call it a panic strategy is the right term, because it's a strategy to get two things done. One, it's to get before the jury the fact that this person is a member of a group that the defense attorneys hope the juries don't like. And by letting the jury know this person was transgender or gay or lesbian or African American or Latino or Jewish or Muslim, that the jury will think that the victim somehow is less worthy, and therefore the fact that that person was victimized or killed somehow is not as severe. And that's the goal of this strategy. So in all those cases, it's preying on prejudice.
Transgender or not transgender, she was human, and she was a child, and she was brutally murdered.
So I can only go back to my own growing up as a teenager. I didn't have a role model. I didn't know how to be a transgender woman, because it's not like there is a book you can purchase and tells you exactly how to act, how to behave, how to talk, how to dress as a woman. I think that it's a learned behavior. And so when you have a group of peers who act a certain way, who behave a certain way, you naturally start to act and behave a certain way. So I don't think that Gwen had done anything wrong at all. I think what needs to happen is, as we as a community continue to move forward, as we become more and more visible, we have to be willing to take up the role as mentor, to help the younger generations to grow up and to be strong so that they don't have to go through what some of us have gone through in life.
Just like everyone else, I'm entitled to my privacy. And I strongly believe in my privacy. And because I'm trying to get to know someone, I'm not just gonna tell them, oh, hi, I'm Christine and I'm transsexual on a first date, is what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that I'm gonna wait until emotions are getting, when emotions are really becoming strong. Some people argue that they say, well, emotions could be strong the first day. Well, if that's the case, then I don't want you, because this is not healthy for me. But I normally don't tell people until I feel ready. And that doesn't mean with a guy, it means with friends that I meet, just people in general. If you don't know, then you don't need to know. Because I don't see that as being something important. I would tell you out of trust. Remember, this is me opening myself up to you. This is when I know I can trust you. And I feel in a safe place to tell you this.
I was going out just a few times with a police officer in the Bay Area, and I really started to like him. And I felt he was attracted to me as well. He didn't know, and I hadn't told him, but I came to a crossroads. I knew that I had to tell him because I wanted to touch him. I wanted to hold his hand. I wanted to kiss him. And I knew I couldn't till I told him. So I sat him down and I told him, and it was very difficult, but it was something that had to be done. Once I told him, he was shocked, and he had strong emotions, but he was a man that had control of himself. And he was only there for maybe another half an hour after I told him, and he said he needed to go. And I said, that's okay. I'm just glad I had a chance to talk to you and have this heart-to-heart. And he told me he liked me. He said goodbye. He said he didn't know if he was going to see me anymore. And of course, we didn't see each other anymore. I had a chance, though, to talk to him on the telephone. And I asked him, what happened to us? What happened to the relationship that was growing between us? And his response was kind of shallow, and it really doesn't do him justice because he is a better man than this. But his response was, my friends couldn't handle this.
Are you a man or a woman?
I'm a woman.
And how do you know that?
Well, I know that because when I go to the store to buy clothes, the women's sizes fit me. That's a very, very interesting question. How do I know I'm a woman? I can't even answer that because I grew up with expectations of people, thinking that I was a girl, and I liked things that girls liked for the most part, not always, and I guess it's just society says I'm a girl.
Are you a man or a woman?
A man.
And how do you know that?
I know, because look at me. That's a good question. Look at me. Yeah, I know what I am.
I'm a woman.
And why do you feel that way?
Because I have a vagina, basically.
I am a man.
And how do you know that?
I was born with genitalia.
I was born a man, a male, all my male parts, and I like females, and I'm not gay, and I know I'm a man.
How do you know that you're a man?
I was born a male.
In what way?
In all ways. I mean...
If you did a DNA test and your DNA came back and said you had male chromosomes, would that change how you thought about yourself?
No, I don't think it would change how I thought of myself at all.
That won't happen.
What if it did?
It's not.
What if it did?
That'll be a trip, but it ain't gonna happen. Yeah.
No, it wouldn't.
You wouldn't like start using men's bathrooms and change your driver's license?
No, probably not, because I think most people would probably identify me as a woman also. So no need to confuse anybody.
If my DNA came back male, gosh, I don't know. Maybe I would, for 1 year, dress like a guy, just because I could potentially get away with it.
I feel like I would have serious issues. I'll be confused. I don't know. It'll be a weird feeling.
Would you change your name and start living as a female?
Probably would. Probably would.
You would?
Probably have to. Yeah, wow. I think I would.
So you would start wearing a dress and using a women's bathroom?
Yeah. Do it all. Yeah.
Would you date the girls too?
Yeah, would it change who you dated, male or female?
Yeah, I think it would. I think if I was a female, I'd start dating males.
You wouldn't date the girls?
No, I wouldn't date the girls.
Wow.
I'll date the guys.
And then what would you feel if 6 months after living as a female, the lab came back and said, sorry, we made a terrible mistake.
I'll be confused. I'll be really confused then.
If you're in a relationship with somebody, say for 6 months, and you hadn't been intimate yet, but then they reveal to you that they're a transgender person and that their anatomy is different from what you were expecting, how would you feel about that person? What was it that would make you most concerned about her revealing that she's transgender?
Well, I mean, first of all, she's not, number one. Number two, it has to do with the honesty part of it. So if she wasn't upfront the whole time, then there's a problem in the relationship and the foundation of it.
And if so, she is upfront, say earlier in the relationship, you might have considered continuing it?
I probably wouldn't. That's definitely no-go, but I don't have any problems with transgender.
In a certain way, that would change how I thought about him. I don't think it would change how I love him or how I care about him, but it would certainly change how I perceive him.
Would you stay in a relationship with him?
If he wanted to stay, yes.
I would still go our own ways, because it'd be in my mind that I used to be a man, and now it's a woman. And I just feel that we go our own ways if I found that out. Yeah.
Because that's something that you're supposed to tell a person. You shouldn't hide it, Yeah. It doesn't matter. I got friends of every kind of sex and everything.
I probably wouldn't want to be sexual with that person, but if that was somebody I really loved and I thought I could spend the rest of my life with and share everything with, yeah, I mean, then sure, why not? It would be silly to give up the love that you have for somebody just because they're transgendered, I think.
Remain seated, come to order. This court is now in session. The Honorable Harry Shepherd presides.
that picture out there. And the comments that I make this morning, we refer to the victim in this case as Gwen. Looking at him, what you're looking at is a killer. You're looking at a narcissistic, self-centered, egotistical, shallow, cold-hearted killer. That's plain and simple. That's the way I see him. That's the way I see this case. So understand that what I say flows from that. This man here, Jason Casares, is the killer's brother. He's always got the killer's back.
That is not consistent with what you know in this case. He has no criminal record. He's not a member of any gang. There's no evidence of his having a violent disposition. That description ignores testimony of a number of witnesses we've called in this case.
Well, it is a disturbing thing. It's when you have community standards, it sets up very inconsistent ideas about justice. And it's not unlike during the Vietnam War, my brother was a conscientious objector. He really was in his beliefs and demeanor and history, and no one in Logan, Utah ever got to be a conscientious objector. And whereas if he lived in Boston, there were lots. So there's just serious questions about context and how justice works.
We decided that collectively as a jury, we would sort of try to come up with an agreement or have a majority rule on what would be considered, behavior at that level, that how a reasonable person would behave, because we felt it was sort of a community standard that was being asked about rather than, some kind of a relative criteria.
Nothing happened. That's what she counted in her way, that there was nothing wrong. So good, and I looked in her eye, I said, "Are you man?" She told me, probably. She told me, and she just looked down. I said, "I got a fucking no." And I took my hands and I spread her legs as hard as I could, and I went like this, and I grabbed the package.
Was she on that on the record? Ms. Brown, you had your hands up your ears.
Yes, I did.
Did you hear any of it?
Yes, I did.
What was the part that you were concerned about hearing?
The way I acted, I'm embarrassed because if you look at the tape, it's very embarrassing. I look like an idiot up there. And the things I said, and the way I said with anger, the way I said I did what I did in the bathroom was just very embarrassing to me. And you'd probably be embarrassed if you were up here too.
I suggest to you that the person you were then was not only somebody who was very angered by the deception and by Leah's hitting you, but you also were homophobic, weren't you?
I didn't understand it. I never met anybody like Leah
I'm
before.
talking about at the time.
At the time, I never met anybody like Leah before. I didn't understand.
You were offended by the notion of a man having sex with another man, weren't you?
At that time, yes.
Yes. Had very strong emotions about it, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
What was the state of your belief at that point that Leah was a woman?
Excuse me?
The state of your state of mind about Leah being a woman versus being a man?
Yes, Leah was a woman.
Is there any question in your mind at that time?
No. I was curious why Jose was so upset, but I didn't think there was any merit to Leah being anything but a woman.
From Gwen's point of view, and this is so hard for people to wrap their heads around who haven't thought about or learned about transgender phenomena and all the complexities of sexuality and gender, the idea of what was she, he really, as if there's some rock bottom what the real truth is. And we often look at presence or absence of a penis as like the real truth. There are tests they've done with little kids where they'll have pictures of naked bodies and they'll alter things like hair length. So you'll have a picture of someone with long hair and a penis, and they'll ask him, is this a girl or a boy? And mix up all kinds of displays, including sometimes breasts with a penis. And they'll always tend, I don't know always, but the tendency is to look, is it a penis or not?
You know, we're going to have to shut her the fuck up. And option B is looking better and better. It's about weighing of the options. Kill. To not kill.
Over and over again, there's been evidence that none of them had violent dispositions. They were known to go off like some kind of firecracker. They weren't into beating people up. They weren't, how would I say it, sexually perverted. They weren't child molesters. They didn't follow, stalk, I don't know, force themselves upon women. These are ordinary people.
But I think that we sufficiently showed, and I think in discussions with jurors, and as this case has played out, the sexual deception as a provocation was put out there. And I think the jurors understood it. The juror who I just quoted in the newspaper referred to sexual deception.
So the idea it was deceit or a lie is assuming that there's only two things here, the real truth or a lie. Whereas there's lots of ambiguity in the world. And I think it's the inability to put up with ambiguity that, especially when one's own fears and vulnerabilities and am I gay, all that kind of ambiguity that's strongly laced with emotion was involved for the killers.
After we talked for a while, and I mean, I basically, Lita told me at some point, why don't you just tell Jose that I'm a woman for me, And I wanted to just end it, but being that Jose was my best friend, I couldn't lie to him. If I didn't find out for certain, I wasn't going to tell him I knew for certain. And I told Lita, I can't do that. He's upset, and I'm not going to go out there and lie to him and say I found out. I mean, I believe Lita was a woman, but I just wasn't going to lie to him.
They weren't ogres. They never were. What occurred will never occur again in their lifetime. It was unique, it was unusual, it was unexpected, it was random. It was like a bolt of lightning that struck and singed their minds. They are no threat to society. This is so unique, so rare, so inordinate. They're not bad kids.
And it hasn't been easy, to rehear all the testimony and see all the evidence in the courtroom was really, really hard. But it's also a relief. It's time for justice, and it's just been a long time. We've waited for a long, long time. So I have a good feeling with this jury. I really do.
I think all three of us, the defense lawyers, did an outstanding job, and the jury was mesmerized. If this was an ordinary case, I would say we get what we want. This is not an ordinary case. We're on a territory that's been unexposed previously, this kind of a killing and the transgender issue. Therefore, there's no predictions. We just don't know what this jury will do with it. They're a good jury, but it's still very uncertain as to what the ultimate verdict's going to be.
What I think is clear, what I think the evidence overwhelmingly established, and what I believe without even the shadow of the doubt in my own mind, is that within the garage, Magidson took a rope, wrapped it around Gwen's neck, and squeezed and twisted until she died.
4 years. That is what a judge in Fresno gave Estanislao Martinez for murder of Joe Robles after he claimed a gay panic. His lawyer told the judge he had a good excuse. At the time, Martinez thought Robles was a woman.
So that tells you how valuable we are. Not at all.
Members of the gay and lesbian community say it shows a double standard at the district attorney's office.
If I just stole money from you, wrote a bunch of hot checks, I would serve more time than this person did for stabbing someone 20 times.
The victim's family tells Action News that they believe the sentence was too short. Martinez could be a free man in 2 years.
Manslaughter carries terms of 3 years, 6 years, and 11 years. So somebody concluded, prosecutor, I guess, that they're willing to resolve the case for the mitigated term, which I don't know enough about it to be able to second guess that. But there were other terms, other sentences available. But secondarily, it seems to me that one of the things that is true about a claim of manslaughter and heat of passion, it's actually the whole term is sudden quarrel or heat of passion, is that in some ways it is very much a community determination. And it seems to me that someone could question the judgment of the district attorney's office to have the decision made by them in their office and not have the community, 12 people, make that decision.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please listen to the reading of your verdicts.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my understanding that you've been unable to arrive at a verdict as to the defendant Cazares. Is that correct? And I previously told you, without you naming as the individual defendant, that you all indicated to me that further deliberations as to the defendant Cazares would not be beneficial in arriving at a unanimous verdict. Is that correct? Yes. As to the defendant Cazares, Jason Cazares, the court hereby declares a mistrial on the basis that the jury has been unable to arrive at a unanimous verdict as it pertains to the defendant Jason Cazares.
Listen to the reading of your verdicts. People of the State of California versus Michael W. Magidson. Verdict of jury. We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant Michael W. Magidson not guilty of a felony to wit, first-degree murder, a violation of Section 187A of the Penal Code of California as charged in Count 1 of the information. Dated September 8, 2005, signed foreperson, juror number 4. Omitting title of court and cause, verdict of jury. We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Michael W. Magidson, guilty of a felony to wit, second-degree murder, a violation of Section 187A of the Penal Code of California, in that on or about October 3, 2002, in the County of Alameda, State of California, said defendant did unlawfully and with malice aforethought murder Edward Araujo, a human being, as charged in Count 1 of the information. We, the jury, further find the defendant, Michael W. Magidson, did not commit the above offense because of victim's race, color, religion, nationality, country. People of the State of California versus Jose A. Merrill. Verdict of jury. We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Jose A. Merrill, guilty of a felony to wit, second-degree murder, a violation of Section 187A of the Penal Code of California, in that on or about October 3, 2002, in the County of Alameda, State of California, said defendant did unlawfully and with malice aforethought murder Edward Araujo, a human being, as charged in Count 1 of the information. We, the jury, further find that the defendant, Jose A. Merrill, did not commit the above offense because of victim's race, color, religion, nationality, country of origin, ancestry, gender, disability.
It's been a long haul. It's been a long haul. 3 years, 2 trials, and the bottom line is we'll never be happy. She's gone. We're never going to get her back. So it really doesn't matter what kind of a sentence they got. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. She's gone. But you know, it is what it is. And overall, it was justice. Overall, in her mind, her heart, and her soul, she was a female.
The jury had a brief opportunity to speak with them, and they indicated that they were divided 9-3, with 9 jurors being in favor of convicting Mr. Cazares of murder, and 3 jurors not being quite convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he was guilty of murder.
Many people in the community were concerned about whether or not the defendants would have been found to have acted in the heat of passion. That is, whether the jury would return a verdict of manslaughter. Obviously, the jury did not buy that.
I'm happy with the verdicts. The jury did an awesome job. I totally appreciate their dedication and their hard work, and it's been a lot. It's long nights and long days, and this jury really put a lot of work into, their decision, and I appreciate that. And the DA's office did an awesome job with, all their hard work and dedication. I'm forever grateful for that. I know a lot of us are tired. I'm tired, and but nothing's going to bring Gwen back. I know that. But this is at least a step towards closure and healing for my family, which is desperately needed at this point.
Just as having sex with different women boosted their egos and made them feel more macho, maybe her having sex with them just validated her feelings of being a beautiful young woman. She lived every day of her life yearning and longing to be a girl in every sense of the word. So if anyone who didn't know her made her feel that way, why would she reveal that she is transgender? Especially in today's society, she would have been rejected, if not harmed, had she been so open about it. She was rejected at school, her church, and even within her own family. So I don't blame her for doing drugs and drinking, the only things that didn't reject her. A lot of adults fall in hard times and turn to drugs and alcohol. But can you imagine not having a place to work, a place to learn, a place to worship, because you are treated as if you are not human? Gwen was so lost and in tears when she opened up the Bible and asked her mother, where does God have a place for people like me? Gwen's problems were a lot deeper than many people will ever understand.
I wanted them to truly realize what they did. I wanted to hit them like a ton of bricks. I want them to feel guilty. I want them to feel remorse. I want them to cry. Only that way they can be really honest. And maybe someday they'll ask Sylvia for forgiveness. And that will help her. That will help her.
There are days we can't sleep or get out of bed because we were crying all night, remembering her last moments and words. Please don't, I have a family. That kills me inside, knowing I couldn't help her or save her. You have forever changed my family. My little brothers were only 10 and 13 when this happened. We did not only lose Gwen that night, at all of your hands to murder, you also killed her mother. You broke her spirit and her heart.
Both of these young men will have to come to grips with their own denial. If they don't, I would guess that no punishment we can hand out will be as harsh as the nagging guilt they will never be able to get rid of. My sons have been most impacted by this. It hurts me that their mommy hasn't been there for them as much as I should have. But if I haven't been sick or depressed or busy with the trial, I've been too tired to be much fun. I haven't worked since the murder either. Before the murder, I was a legal secretary for 16 years. Now I'm lucky if 2 out of the 3 days are ones that I can work at all. I know that putting these men in jail for a long time won't change any of these things. But if they miss birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, if they miss their children growing up, maybe they'd better understand what they've taken from us.
All rise. Honorable Harry Shepard presiding. Please be seated.
This crime was a brutal beating of a vulnerable victim. The injury that was inflicted on the victim was great and substantial. There was a strangulation, and as I recall the pathologist's testimony, the cause of death was both strangulation and trauma in and about the head and the rest of the body. Those circumstances outweigh the circumstances that I mentioned about the non-existent criminal record.
I know that no matter how many times I say I'm sorry, it won't change anything. But I want all of Lita's family and friends to know that from the bottom of my heart, I'm sincerely and truly sorry.
The sentencing range, Mr. Merrill, is 15 years to life. And the court sentences you to the California State Prison for a term of 15 years to life imprisonment.
The case was based entirely on lies. Lies by the witnesses, lies by my co-defendants, and worst of all, these lies were encouraged by the prosecutor. I received nothing remotely close to a fair and unbiased trial. But I sit here today with my head held high, because you will never break my spirit.
He hasn't manifested to me, or anything in writing, that he's at all sorry. He finds it necessary to blame someone else. The sentencing range for this crime is 15 years to life, and the court sentences Michael Magidson to the term of 15 years to life imprisonment in the California State Prison.
Not since there is no justice, no matter what sentence you give a person. But still, there is the issue of trying to find the right sentence for the crime. And the sentence that was given was, in my opinion, too light.
There's no amount of time that they could have given these men could ever justify in my heart what they did. I, as a Christian woman, had to forgive them. It was the hardest thing in my life I've ever had to do. Jaron Neighbors is a pastor now in the prison, in the jail. He hasn't gone to prison yet, in the jail. He's the one that testified against his friends. Jose Merrill has asked to speak to me too. Well, so has Jaron. And it's the reason why I'm going to go visit them. And because I believe in my heart that Jose Merrill, although he's the one that hit her over the head with the soup can and the skillet, truly didn't know that Gwen is anatomically a male. He also, in open court, confessed his love for my daughter. I love him for that. And he has shown a lot of remorse and cried when we did our statements in the second trial at the end, and took accountability and responsibility for her death, even though I don't blame him for her death. He never wanted this to happen, I believe in my heart, and neither did Jaron. And Jaron, I think, is one of those kids just trying to fit in at the wrong place at the wrong time, but they had no idea what was going to transpire that night. And being under the influence of alcohol and or drugs or both, this horrible crime happened. But I truly believe in my heart that they didn't want this to happen, not death. The other two have not shown any remorse, but I still forgiven them. But I can't say that I would visit them if they ever asked. I wanted to go hug him in the courtroom, Jose Merrill, when he spoke to us and apologized and said for us to forgive him, because had he not lost his temper that night, she would still be here.
And there are times when we can see and witness and know that our culture is changing. And I think that when the San Francisco Chronicle stopped calling Gwen Eddie, it was a victory. Thank you.
No one ever gave us any rights. We've always had to fight to win them. And we have to continue to fight to win them. And that is what this is about. And that is why it's a civil rights movement.
I am a man.
How do you know that?
Well, that's an interesting question.
I am a woman in a male body that's been feminized.
Are you a man or a woman?
I'm a woman from birth.
Here's what I think, but again, I'm very naive. There's no such thing as a man or a woman.
I'm definitely a woman.
How do you know that?
It's in my soul. And I don't think it's something that you can articulate as an answer. It's something just like my name. You have to take my words for it.
If I could modify your question, I'm not comfortable with only man or woman. I feel like my gender identity is that of a gay woman, which is very different than that I feel of a woman.
I'm a man.
How do you know that?
Lighthearted question. As I've I don't know how to answer that other than beyond a philosophical question of how do I know I'm alive?
I'm a man.
How do you know that?
I engage in sexual activities with significant others who are female. I was born a man because I have a penis. My mother gave me a male name.
And then you postulate that's a man and this is a female. But in fact, we all share, man and female, share it. And it's not so simple as like, does the baby have a penis? Not so simple. No, that's not the criterion.
If your DNA came back and said you have female DNA, would that change how you thought future self?
I happen to know how DNA works, so DNA is like a fingerprint. It's pretty reliable.
So what would you think if it came back and said you were female?
Well, I guess the DNA is correct.
And came up genetically male, I think that it would change things, but I would still have some hope because I know that all people start out as a female egg.
I guess it would blow my mind, but I would still be who I am.
You know, how would that hit me at age 71? I think that I would smile and say right on.
Absolutely not. I already know what my DNA is. I don't need to have a test.
I think if I were in an accident and I lost the bottom half of my body from the waist down, I would still think of myself a man. I've always been a man in my view. And
I think that and it's a good thing, we will share more and more of male and female components as we evolve. I think that's the manifest destiny of evolution. Unisexuality or monosexuality or whatever you want to call it.